Is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to. I call the member for Solomon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister, Solomon has one of the highest defence population of any electorate in Australia, as you are very well aware. With 4 bases within Solomon, the Defence Establishment Berrimah, the RAF Base Darwin, the Larrakia Barracks, which includes HMAS Coonawarra, the Robinson Barracks and the 5,000 or so uniformed defence personnel in the Darwin and Palmerston area, that there is a high level of interest in defence policy in my electorate. Now, it had not escaped the notice of these personnel that the previous Labor Greens government, under the 3 Prime Ministers, cut defence spending as a proportion of GDP to the lowest levels since before World War II. Now, Minister, the mood is very different now, and my constituents both within the defence community and the business sector are very happy with the ongoing defence infrastructure investment in Solomon and indeed the Northern Territory. The $18 million in defence infrastructure projects for the Northern Territory unveiled in the budget, including projects at RAF Tyndall, Shoal Bay, RAF Darwin and Robinson Barracks, have been very welcomed by ADF personnel and by the business community in Solomon, who will have the opportunities to participate in supply and construction of these projects. Another project which is generating a lot of interest from a defence perspective is the proposal to create an $18 million joint logistics facility at the East Arm Wharf to accommodate the Royal Australian Navy amphibious vessels and the new Canberra-class landing helicopters docked ships. And I note today that there was an expedience motion that was put to the House, so we're very pleased about that. It has also been noted within the community that the facility will benefit both defence and industrial barge operators, to whom the facility will also be available. Minister, recently the Vietnam Veterans Association of Australia, the Northern Territory branch, welcomed the Prime Minister's announcement that Australian servicemen killed in the Vietnam War would be repatriated back to Australia should the families wish to do so. Minister, as you are aware, it was a Territorian, Mr Bob Shearing, who was one of the driving forces behind this policy, and I'm going to say he was very pleased with the announcement that the Abbott government had. The other local link with the Northern Territory was a courageous soldier by the name of Corporal Reg Hillier. Corporal Hillier was working as a jackaroo in the Northern Territory and enlisted to serve his country in 1961. His life working in the outback set him up well for army life, and he excelled in this role. Now, he deployed to Vietnam with the 1st Battalion and was commended for his outstanding leadership and courage. Corporal Hillier, or Reg as he's affectionately known in the Territory, punched above his weight in combat. His tracking skills used to follow and attack small enemy units, and his courage in going into Viet Cong tunnels led to the capture of valuable intelligence. Unfortunately, Reg was killed in action at Vo Dat on November 29, 1965, and his family couldn't afford to have him repatriated back to Australia, so he was laid to rest in Terentak Cemetery. Now, thanks to the recent policy change announced by the Abbott government, Corporal Hillier's remains will be returned home and he will finally laid to rest in the Northern Territory. Minister, the announcement that ADF pay was being locked in for above inflation pay increases for the next 4 years has also been welcomed by my community. Could I please ask, Minister, if you could update the House on the Abbott government's initiative to repatriate Australian servicemen killed overseas and the ongoing commitment to the welfare of Australian serving defence personnel? And could you also please provide an update on the defence infrastructure in Solomon and indeed the Northern Territory?
Thank the member for Solomon. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon for her contribution this evening and, more importantly, for her ongoing advocacy for some 5,000 diverse defence personnel who reside in her electorate of Solomon. Of course, as she mentioned, there are a number of very significant military establishments in Solomon, and therefore interest in defence matters is not just for the ADF personnel themselves, but more importantly, or as importantly, for their family members. She mentioned investment in Solomon. In the 2015-16 budget, the government has made significant defence investments in the electorate of Solomon. This includes $4.9 million to resolve flooding issues at RAF Base Darwin, $5 million to upgrade facilities at the Shoal Bay Receiving Station, and funding for new facilities for the Joint Logistics Unit North. There will also be $18 million spent on a joint logistics facility at Darwin's East Arm Wharf, with the construction due to commence this year. So that's going to be a very significant addition to the facilities in Darwin. And Darwin, of course, with the Robertson Barracks, with the RAF base, with HMAS Coonawarra and other facilities there, is the major defence establishment so far as the north of Australia and that part of the Northern Territory is concerned. There'll also be an investment of about $1.1 million as a program to replace the dated aviation fire trucks with modern equipment. This project is going ahead and will provide facilities at Robertson Barracks to support the introduction of these aviation fire trucks. So overall, increased defence funding reaching a record of $31.9 billion across the nation this year, and very much an important component of that is in the Northern Territory. I'm glad the member mentioned the question of the repatriation of remains from overseas, particularly those from the Vietnam War at the Terendak Cemetery, because this is a matter I'm aware that she's passionately pursued with the government for some considerable time. As she said, on the 25th of May this year, the Australian government announced its offer to repatriate the remains of 35 Australian servicemen and dependents from Terendak and return them to Australia. For a matter of record, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the 521 Australian war dead from the Vietnam War, 26 are buried overseas, one at Kranji War Cemetery, Singapore, one in Ireland with the accordance with the wishes of that person's family, and the remaining 24 are interned in Terendak. A further 6 have had their ashes interred or scattered overseas. The Terendak Military Cemetery in Malaysia comprises 323 graves of Commonwealth servicemen and their dependents, including 34 Australians, of which 24 are Vietnam War dead, 1 Malayan emergency war dead, 2 servicemen who were killed in accidents, and 7 service dependents. So the repatriation effort at this stage is limited to the Terendak Military Cemetery and the one grave at the Kranji War Cemetery in Singapore. And I think as a nation this gives us an opportunity. The honourable member mentioned that the family of Corporal Hillier weren't able to afford to bring his body home. I think this is an opportunity for us as a nation to put this right and to bring these men home, obviously in accordance with the wishes of their family and remaining relatives. It's the one conflict in Australian history whereby repatriation of fallen service personnel was not consistent, and indeed I think looking back we did a pretty poor job as a nation in relation to those people who served us in Vietnam, whatever the differences might have been politically about that conflict. I think as a nation we have an obligation to our servicemen and women to treat them with the utmost respect, and we fell down in many regards, I think, in relation to the Vietnam War. So the Prime Minister made this announcement on the 25th of May and said that those who died in the Vietnam War would be repatriated with full military honours, and I think that's the deserving thing to do in these cases. Ultimately, the decision whether or not to repatriate the remains of these Australians lies with their individual families, as it should, but where the families in these situations would wish the remains to be repatriated to Australia, then the honourable thing to do on behalf of the nation is to carry out the wishes of the family.
I thank the Minister.